Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Bid Breakfast. It is Wednesday morning at 8:30. Hopefully, there's a nice day wherever you are in the country or the world, and you are on your way into work. Although Rob's probably at the end of his day now, being in Australia. So
30 degrees, if anyone's interested. There you go.
30 degrees. That's something that we're looking forward to over the summer. And morning, Chris. Great to have you back again.
I know. You have a session off, and the world changes.
That's right. You were actually out doing some real work 2 weeks ago, weren't you?
Yeah, Perry should have thought we better do some actual work rather than answering your questions.
I know, fantastic. Right, speaking of questions, we'll get on today. Just got the normal news updates. There's 4 things just to bring to people's attention today. First of all, there is a new CQC assessment framework for those people that are involved in healthcare. We are going to cover that in a lot more detail in the April webinar, and we will have a special guest to bring us up to speed on that. So we're not going to say too much more about that today, but for those healthcare providers, go and have a look at that. Just make sure you're ready for how that's going to look this year and into the future. Chris, I just want to bring you in on the next one. I mean, we've known this for years, that the end of the public sector year is in the next few weeks. There's always a mad rush to spend unused budget. So is there anything that you think it would be useful for people to just be aware of?
Yeah, all I'd probably say, Matt, is that it's notorious. You know, anyone in the sector knows that there's potential last minute purchases from frameworks, some direct awards. There could be some short turnaround, low value stuff. So if you've got capacity, keep an eye on, where you get your notices from, and be ready.
Yeah, brilliant. And linked to that, it's obviously public sector year end for most organisations for 23-24. We've noticed this particularly with some of the procurements that we're working on. Communications have been minimised due to the amount of work that's going on. Year end's a very difficult time in the public sector. And I know that from having been there myself. And the whole focus is on finishing on whatever number you've said and making sure that all of the accounts and reports are there. So don't be surprised if a communications drop off a little. There is an awful lot going on. What people do need to prepare for, though, is financial year 24-25. And of course, from April, all the new budgets will be live again. And I'm sure, Chris, from a procurement point of view, that was probably one of the best times of year, wasn't it? When all of a sudden people started to buy again. Yeah,
you're just getting that kind of green light that the budget's there to go out to market and things like that. Then the interesting thing, I know we're coming on to the Procurement Act next, but it will be what do contracting authorities prioritise, early doors in the next financial year ahead of the Procurement Act coming in.
And that's a perfect link, Chris. So if you want to take us into the Procurement Act, then we can finish off the news update.
Fab. Yeah, just a quick update. There was an update at the end of February. The implementation is still planned to kind of go live October 24. The secondary legislation is due anytime now, and there's some e-learning modules due in April alongside those drop-ins that we've been kind of talking about on the gov.uk website.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Right, Rob, I know you've been fairly quiet in the news section, but obviously you've been preparing yourself ready for the first question that we've got today. And this is actually one that we started to talk about a fortnight ago. And this was, what are the most common mistakes you see bidders make? So we ran out of time last time. We said we'd come back to this as the first question. So I'll throw that over to you.
Well, common mistakes, particularly when I'm reviewing bids, are that the bidders have completely misunderstood the question, misinterpreted the question, because they've rushed through looking at it, or they've just got the wrong end of the stick. Another one, I think I mentioned this last time, is ignoring the evaluation criteria. There's a bid I reviewed a couple of months ago where it was very clear you needed to provide evidence and added value. Nothing in the bid. And when I told the client, they were kind of surprised. It's like, oh yeah, we hadn't looked at that. Never mind. And a big one, which probably leads on to some of your points that you might make, Matt, is not doing any pre-bid work, essentially having no knowledge of the buyer, the area, or very limited knowledge at least.
Brilliant. Chris, I'll come to you in a minute from a other side of the table perspective, but I think some of the sort of common mistakes I see are that people sit on a bid for too long. So they might see it come out on day one and think, oh, I've got 6 weeks on that. That's loads of time. And we'll get onto that when we've dealt with the next thing. And then it gets to 2 or 3 weeks before the deadline and they haven't made any progress at all. So I think that's one of the big things that really puts you at a disadvantage. So as soon as a bid's live, at least download the documents and read them and come up with a plan of what you're going to do. Other common mistakes that I generally see are that people do pricing at the end. And I've seen this particularly when I worked in the NHS. The process there was that pricing came probably in the last week, and there were 2 or 3 bids that we worked on, which isn't loads over the sort of 3 or 4 years that I worked in that particular team. So it's probably 1 a year where the pricing was done and then it suddenly was unviable and we didn't bid. So we'd written the entire bid and then pulled out at the last minute. So even if it's draft pricing, do that and try and schedule it so that it's along with your written drafts. So we've been saying this for years. If you're going to have 2 or 3 drafts, have 2 or 3 drafts of your pricing. But it should also be one of your qualification criteria, whether it's got any sort of level of profit in or not. I think some of the other things that people do are underestimate how long it takes to actually make a submission. So we've got one this week that needs to go in. I've allowed myself 36 hours for that. There's all sorts of little finicky things that need to happen, documents that need to be attached as opposed to cut and paste into portals. There's file naming conventions to deal with. There's all sorts of different things. So make sure you allow yourself enough time at the end and don't make it into a mad rush. I'm sure I could go on for hours and hours about this one, but just in the interest of time, Chris, is there anything that you would see from a procurement perspective that bidders do wrong?
Can I come in on it from a bidder's perspective? It was just something that we worked on recently, whereby the business model or the plan for the solution that was being prepared took probably longer than anticipated, which then affected the timetable and the drafts, because the drafts were dependent on the model and the model was kind of still going on in the background. So I think that's, alongside pricing, if your solution is dependent on a model, then that's got to be a priority to then make sure the rest of the process is as efficient as possible. From a procurement perspective, stick to the instructions. If there's good quality instructions, if there's a particular font size, use the word count that's there, or character count, maximize that. If there are attachments, use where appropriate, clearly reference it to make life easier. Don't just put "see attached," and also don't reference other answers in your response, because potentially the evaluator that's judging, say, question 1 might not be evaluating question 4. So if you're going to refer to something, make sure there's a proper section included.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. And I think just linked to that, the final point that I would make on this is that bidders don't understand how they will win or be successful, whether that's a bid or a framework. And linked to that again is people bid on stuff they can never win. They just see an advert and think, oh, we supply pencils, we'll bid for it. And it might be that they supply the wrong pencil, or they don't have the right level of turnover, or whatever it might be, but they're in a race that they can never win. So use your time, because it is valuable, in the right way and on the right opportunities. Well, I think we've pretty much covered that in terms of the top 3 to 5 things each. So shall we move on to the next one? And Rob, this is probably firmly in your camp as our AI expert and linked to this month's webinar, actually. And it's, should I use AI to write an answer?
And there will be a blog coming out linked to this later today about using AI in the right way, AI usage. The simple answer is no, with some caveats. So what you can use it for, and it depends on the model you're using. Don't use a free AI model and expect to get anything decent out of it, regardless of what you're asking for. If you're going to use something, probably want to use something that's paid for. There's various ones out there. Check what works best for you. But use it for ideas, use it for a bit of brainstorming. You can use it for summarizing documents. You could use it for structuring and planning your answers, or at least to give you a second opinion of that. You can use it to rewrite content. if you get really stuck on a sentence or a paragraph, maybe get the AI to rewrite it, see what it comes out with, and you probably end up taking a combination of what you've done and what it's done and bringing them together. But it's great for writer's block. The worry is that people will become lazy with it and just go, write it. Now, I've done a few tests on that, on kind of not live bids, and seeing what it comes out with. It's never going to have the full context or human intelligence to get it right. In the same way that humans never going to get it right first time either. So don't expect the AI to do it. I could go on and on and on. We will obviously talk about it later this month in the webinar, but the key thing is no, do not use it just to write an answer from scratch.
This is a really interesting one, Rob, because I know people that we've worked with very closely over the last few years who, out of desperation, have used AI to essentially write most of a bid. I think there was a kind of final polish, and it was successful. Now, in my head, I was kind of like trying to juggle how all this works and is there a place for AI? And I think where I've come back to, and it's a point you touched on, which is the quality of the AI. So as with all of the people in our profession, you'll get people who are just starting out and inexperienced. You'll get people who've been around for a while and are experienced. And within that, you'll get people who are good and bad at what they do. And I think that's the same in terms of AI is if you can find something that is as good as a bid writer, and I don't know if there will ever be a time when someone's as good as you, Rob, and that's the only time I'll ever say that. Perhaps there might be an argument for AI writing a bid that's maybe a little bit simpler. I think for me that it's when the complexity gets high, when you've got lots of connections to make, there's different things to weave together. If it's a fairly straightforward compliance framework, maybe.
I think it could potentially write a first draft. I mean, the first draft always gets polished and polished. I mean, we usually do at least 2 to 3 drafts.
Yeah.
But whatever you do, the quality of what comes out is dependent on the work you put into it.
Yeah.
So the prompt engineering or whatever you want to call it, there is a skill in getting the right information into it and giving it the right context. You can't just go, answer this question. We're called X company. We do Y. It still doesn't have enough context. You would have to keep refining it and refining it to get to where you need to be. Now, whether that's, that might be as much work as it is to potentially draft it yourself. It may be better quality than you're doing it. Who knows? I mean, AI is moving so quickly as well. I think ChatGPT 5 is rumored to come out towards October. So, yeah, again, we could go on and on about it, but we've got a full hour at the end of the month. So.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting one. You kind of think back to when mobile phones first came about, and everybody, the big ones with the aerial and everything else, and you could literally just make a phone call, and they were almost a hindrance as opposed to being useful. And now it's very rare that you see somebody that doesn't have a mobile phone in their pocket or their hand, or in fact wearing tech now. So I think this is a really interesting space, and I'm sort of quite excited about where it goes to. Chris, is there anything you want to say on that, or should we move on to the next one?
Just quickly, I think if we evaluated, an AI bid, it may get like a 1 or 2 out of 5. There wouldn't be any personalization, the added value that would score higher marks. So just to concur with Rob's view that potentially early days draft, there could be some value in it. But I think contracting authorities will get wise to this, and then there will be kind of looking for clarity around what's being provided.
Okay.
Like some people ask for, in a bid, have you used a bid writer? There could be a question, have you used AI, and all that type of stuff. So yeah, one to keep an eye on, I think.
Brilliant. All right. Well, like we said, we're going to pick this up in the webinar at the end of the month. We've got a full hour on this, so it should be a really interesting session. Okay, so the next one. What is the best client you have worked with? Now, clearly, we're not going to name any names here, but Rob. In fact, let's go to Chris first. Chris, who's the best client you've worked with?
I've got 2 that spring to mind. One I worked on with Rob. Was it prior to Christmas?
Is it one we worked with twice?
Yes,
Yeah.
and you know, the benefits I found was that we stuck to timelines. The feedback that we got for the drafts was excellent. In terms of challenging them to find more information, came back in time. The depth of information that we got back was amazing. So yeah, those are the two things. We stuck to timelines, committed, buy-in, and the feedback was excellent. And they got onto the framework that they were wanting to, and I think we got them an extra 10 or 15% on their quality score. So yeah, good outcome as well. And the second one was a bit more recent, whereby they did have a bid team. They just needed some additional support, and because they had an existing bid team, they knew what information to provide that came over and stuff like that. So the process and the timeline had more degree of flexibility because they knew that they talked about win themes, they had the structure there, and they gave us 2 or 3 past bids. It worked really, really well, and that's a recent one, so I don't know the outcome yet.
Brilliant. Rob?
Yeah, there was, I'll just go with one, and the best thing about these guys was the amount of pre-bid work they put into it. They knew a framework was coming up. It must have been maybe 6 months, maybe even a year away. Matt, we worked with them. You'll recognise it when I talk through it. But a lot of pre-bid work. They'd spoken to the buyer about what they might want, when it'll come out, what they'll be looking for. And one of the best things they did is they did a test bid to develop content, which was a great way. They weren't that bothered necessarily about getting onto the framework or the bid, but they used it as a good way of generating and developing content with us. And they scored about 90%. So that went pretty well, which put them in the excellent position when the bid actually came out, which had less questions than the test bid. That it was a fairly simple process in writing the answers, and they easily got onto the framework. But I think that just shows the importance of being pre-prepared and doing your pre-bid work up front.
Rob, we've just had a question from Leonie on this, which was, did you help them with the pre-bid work?
We did, didn't we, Matt?
Yeah.
And actually, I'll pass over to you slightly for that bit, because otherwise I'll just keep talking. But you took the lead on a lot of that.
So, as Rob said, we did. Unfortunately, I think they approached us. I can't remember now because it was a few years ago. It was sort of like 6 to 9 months before the framework was actually released, and they knew that it was coming up, and they were well positioned. But Rob mentioned, I think, that there was another bid that sort of came out of left field that we actually worked on, and that was the kind of test case. So all the pre-bid work we'd done for the main framework that they were looking at, some of it we were able to test out in the interim one that we bid on. My best client is a very similar situation to the one you've just described, Rory. In fact, it's almost identical, just in a different sector. And we did a year's pre-bid work with them, and it was me that did all that pre-bid work. What was interesting about that one was that when I'd gone to the board and recommended an approach, which was based on what the buyer wanted, there was very clear instructions on what organisational form the bidders should take, which was part of the recommendations to the board. The board decided that they weren't going to go with that, and they were going to take a completely different strategy, which then meant that almost all of the pre-bid work we'd done had to be reshaped to a new strategy. It was a negotiation process which ran over about 9 months. There were multiple layers in that, from negotiations to presentations to submissions, and eventually we ended up with a very positive outcome and won the whole thing. But just in terms of how responsive they were, so the thing that really impressed me with those guys was that they looked at the information available to them from pre-bid and made the decision and stuck to it. And then once the decision was made, we then worked on how we were going to win it based on that approach. And everybody in the organisation was aligned to that approach. So whether you agreed with it or not, everybody accepted that was the approach, and everyone pulled in the same direction. And I think with an organisation that size, and this was a contract over £1 billion over 10 years, it was a huge contract. There were multiple stakeholders in the bid. But the thing that really impressed me was that alignment. So you just accept that that's the direction of travel, and you get on with it, whether you agree with it or not. And we only get, yes, amazing for clients to be thinking like this so far ahead. Absolutely. Probably 80 to 90% of the people we work with don't do pre-bid work. We will get a phone call the day the bid's released, or sometimes with 2 weeks to go, saying, can you help us? Despite the amount of times that we bang on about pre-bid activity and preparation and looking at your pipeline, seeing what's coming up, starting to do all sorts of bits and pieces, people still come to us at the last minute. I think we better move on. Seeing this, we've taken quite a bit of time on that. Now, this is a really interesting one. What is the most difficult bid you have ever worked on? So, Rob, I think I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, there was a very large bid, probably about 18 months ago. Lots of partners involved, lots and lots and lots of people having lots and lots of meetings. Lots of meetings as the bid timeline went on and on and on. A lot of fussing around style over content. A lot of worrying about what acronyms meant. All sorts of things. That was very difficult because it was very hard to actually get on with the real work. Well, what I would call the real work of developing the bid itself. Yeah, I mean, it's not that I don't like people having meetings and discussing things, but it felt like things weren't going anywhere. So it left the timeline quite condensed. The outcome was they won, but that wasn't the point. As a bid writer, that was the most difficult bid I'd ever worked on.
You almost seem aggrieved by that, Rob.
Well, it was a good bid, but just wish we'd had more time to actually write it.
Okay, I mean, mine's very similar to yours, Rob, so I'll move straight to Chris on this.
Thanks. I mean, I wouldn't say it was difficult. It's probably most frustrating. Martin, you may kind of know where I'm going with this. I was kind of supporting a bid, being that procurement person, looking at, are they answering the question? Are they looking at the evaluation criteria? And when I gave the feedback, they didn't like it. Despite it being really clear about what the output was going to be, and it was just like that doesn't align to the branding, it doesn't align to what we're trying to, the messaging and stuff like that. So yeah, that would probably be the most difficult, frustrating, in that it was a public sector procurement that they were going for, and it was part of a review process, but in terms of what their expectations against the review process versus our own, it was obviously different.
Yeah. What I will do just on this one is just to come back to Leonie. So great comment here, which is one of the things that we constantly have a battle with, which is really making me wonder how we can help clients to be more proactive with bid development. And this is what the biggest argument, and the one that seems to resonate the most with people, is to look at their win rate. Say if someone's winning 30 or 40% of their bids, then 60 or 70% of their time is essentially wasted on stuff they're not going to win. The argument we would always make is go back to qualification and try and find 30% of those losing bids that you had no chance of, and don't bid those. That's 30% of your time that you can then put into pre-bid activities. So, if you think about a working week, then 30% is a day and a half. If someone said to you, here's a day and a half, go, have a holiday or put your feet up, you would rip the hand off to do it. The problem that people face on a day-to-day basis is that there's organisational pressure for them to bid things. And so it's not just as easy as saying, well, we won't bid these 3 things of the 10 things on the pipeline, and we'll do pre-bid activity because of the internal pressure. But the logical argument is there. Refocus your time onto things that you can win. The financial argument is obvious. It is absolutely nailed on that that's what you should be doing. But it's the day-to-day pressures and internal politics that often get in the way of that. Now, I could talk about that for ages, and I'm conscious that we're moving towards 9 o'clock, so I will get off my high horse on that one and move on to the next one, which is a great question, and I think one of the things that people often groan about when they see the question, which is your mobilisation plan and what is a good format. So perhaps, Chris, from a procurement point of view, have you got an example of the best mobilisation plan that you've ever seen?
Well, I think the first thing is that this is like one of the other types of things that, a contracting authority might ask for, or a buyer might ask for, supporting information. And apart from stuff, like a carbon reduction plan where there's a template, there is no proper kind of template, is there, out there? I think that's the first challenge for bidders. So I just think if it's kind of part of a question that you're answering, it's got to link. It's got to link, to that. Also think about any previous ones that you've done that you've had like positive feedback against as well. And as part of your kind of bid library, that you're constantly, improving based on feedback, and also how that project went and stuff like that, about adapting. That's probably the only value I can bring to this one.
Go on then, Rob. Let's have your view on this.
Excel. It's the best.
Okay, right, moving
It's
on
the best format. Unless you are experienced in using MS Project, and if the contract authorities allow you to submit something in MS Project or a PDF version, it doesn't necessarily export very well to Excel. I found Project. The easiest format that the commissioners will be able to understand and read is Excel. Do it in a nice table and coloured format. I'd recommend you develop yourself a template in advance if you can.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just based on the constraints of most procurements. I know the one we're working on at the moment specifically says no Microsoft project. I think the main thing for me here is whether it's Excel or not that you use, make sure that you've broken the mobilisation down into the various categories that you would want to see, so it's easy to read. So it might be, post-contract award or post-preferred bidder stage, then into initial audits of the site or the service or whatever you're doing, then into governance. You
Different work streams, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because some mobilisation plans might be 200, 300, 400 lines long, and if it's just a constant flow of information, it's really difficult to read. Okay, right. This is probably my favourite question for today, and we've got
3 minutes
to deal with it.
3 minutes, man.
So, what advice would you give an SME looking to start bidding for contracts? Now, I've not said what sort of contract, so this could be public sector, private sector, whatever. But I think we can probably give a fairly decent overview here. Go on, Rob.
Understand your capabilities and capacity. Doing bids is difficult and time consuming. That's a really important thing to know. If you don't have an in-house bid team, how are you going to do it? And then how are you going to deliver it if you win it as well? Understand who you're up against, understand the buyers, do a lot of pre-bid and market intel before you dive in. If you can go to market engagement events or meet the buyer events, go to those as well. Think about partnering with bigger organizations. That's another one, particularly if your experience is limited. Sign up to a tender alert system. Plenty out there. But there's quite a few free ones as well. So sign up to that and get your categories right. And the other thing is look at frameworks and DPSs, which often have a lower threshold to get into and smaller bits of work off the back of it.
Brilliant. Great practical tips there, Rob. Chris, do you want to just quickly come in before I finish on this one?
Yeah. All I'd say is, if you're using a tender alert system, start to download some documentation, understand what's needed, what kind of business stuff that you need for type of insurances. And obviously, the bigger the value of the contract, the more things that you need. So try and find that sweet spot, of contract value that there's decent margin in it for you. It's not going to take too much time, and you've got a good chance of winning. And use that as your kind of narrowing down your search criteria geographically, would be my recommendation.
Great stuff. Thanks, Chris. My 2 bits of advice really are sort of a bit more high level. The first is don't expect to win first time. You are in a competition. So, when I was working in sales, one of the best phrases I heard was sales is a game of no. And this is a competitive process. So you may win first time. I was going to say you might be lucky. You might have done a great job. But to expect to win a bid for the first time is probably unrealistic. The second thing is get some help. Now, whether that's from people like us or just colleagues in the industry, get someone to show you what to do. I remember the first bid that I worked on, there was 2 of us in a new business development team, And this is when business development was completely new in the NHS, and we didn't have a clue what we were doing. We made so many mistakes on that first bid. It was the best learning thing we ever did, but get some support from somewhere. Okay, we are at 9 o'clock, so hopefully everyone's at their desk. We've got a couple of questions left, which we'll pick up next time. This is a great one. What skills should I look for in a bid writer? What can be brought through a framework? But we will deal with those on the next episode, which is the 27th of March. So have a great day. Rob, Chris, as always, thanks for joining and giving your insights into everything. And we will see you all again in a fortnight.
Cheers.
Cheers.